as a lawyer, I oftentimes would participate in a hearing and in an argument before a court, and a lot of times you would get a pretty clear sense of where the judges were likely to rule based on the comments they were making, the way they were treating particular arguments and certain lawyers. Having been able to witness that hearing, was there a lot of expression of doubt or skepticism or support by the judges who are going to rule on favor of one side or the other? Were you able to develop an expectation about how you think this court would rule?
Well, it is good to see you, Glenn, and thanks for having me. What surprised me this time about the judges is that usually in these hearings with Assange, they would really make known, they would make it their mission to indicate their contempt for him. I think during the first bail violation hearing where they sent him to Belmarsh for 52 weeks, they called him a narcissist. And then during the actual extradition case, they would either say nothing, like express no interest, or they would say something like trivial and then say silent for 4 days. This time they were actually asking questions and asking the right questions, which surprised me, honestly, because if you look at their backgrounds, and I can get into that afterwards, you would think they really would be against them, as all the judges are. So one of the questions that they asked, for example, was like the names of these informants in the leaks, because they were, the U.S. are basically arguing that WikiLeaks and Assange harmed informants, even though the U.S. military said themselves that it's not true. So one of the judges, her name is Sharp, she asked Assange's lawyers, like, the names of these people in the documents and the disclosures, are they the same ones that committed all these war crimes? The torture, the rendition, the killings, the helicopter machine gunning, and the answer is like, yeah, not every single one of them, but they all participated in this war machine. Another question that they asked,
in other words, just to stop there, because it's such an important point, just to make sure that there's clarity on this. The examples that the government was pointing to of names that appeared in the documents and reporting that WikiLeaks published were actual names of the people who performed the acts that were the war crimes that WikiLeaks was reporting on. That's not in every case, but at least some of them, even the British government conceded, some of the examples they pointed to are the people who were the subject of the reporting. Is that essentially the case?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not every single name,
right.
But the point here was that what Assange published had to be published because, the risk to informants does not outweigh the public's right to know and the explosive nature of the materials. It just doesn't. And they were telling them, like, if you can deny us this application to make an appeal hearing at the High Court, but when we go to the European Court of Human Rights, because the UK is a founding member of the European Council, so that's an option. When we go there, they're going to side with us because they're going to look at what happened here, what did Assange and WikiLeaks publish, and they're going to say this counts more. These videos of war crimes count way more than whatever you're going to attribute to, informants. And that's what the U.S. lawyers were saying, that, informants in Syria and China and Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, again, if you go back to Chelsea Manning's court-martial, the DOD themselves are saying they couldn't find a single case of this. Another question that the judges asked, for example, is the death penalty, because the issue with extraditing Assange is not just that he will be put in oppressive conditions, which is the reason the whole extradition was blocked in the first place, but there's the rule of specialty, right? So how do you know the United States are not going to, add other charges on top of this?
So let's just explain that. In other words, like, under the law of pretty much every European country which opposes the death penalty, if there's a chance that the person whose extradition is being sought will face the death penalty, under the law, the government is essentially legally barred from extraditing that person. Is that basically the case?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And this goes to the second main part of Assange's appeal, which is directed at the Home Secretary, because they have the final say on extraditions. And they were basically saying that you cannot send someone to the United States or any country knowing that there's a risk they could be sentenced to death. It's illegal. You cannot do that. The judges were seeking clarification from the U.S. lawyers. They were saying, like, can you actually, is there any guarantee that he won't be sentenced to death? And even the U.S. lawyers were saying, no, there isn't really a guarantee. So they were basically admitting that there's a likelihood that he could be given the death penalty. The U.S. could say, these are capital offenses, and then sentence him to death. And I should also just point out that even if you give Assange, let's say, 30 years in prison, he's 50 now. It's akin to a death sentence. And the prison they want to send him to, ADX Colorado, is a supermax prison. The former warden said, once you go in, you never see the sun again. It's a hellhole. So it was interesting seeing the High Court justices ask these questions, because typically a lot of these judges, they have ties to MI6, they have ties to the British establishment, and they basically hate people like Assange, because Assange really put the spotlight on the US and UK war machine, and they don't like anything that actually democratizes or actually does journalism. So that was really surprising to see from the High Court justices, that they were actually interested and they asked these specific questions.
Yeah, when I was doing this noted reporting, I was involved with almost every country in Europe where we were doing specific reporting. But obviously the UK was the country with which we were most involved after the United States, in part because I was at the British Guardian, but I had the case where the British government detained my husband and also invaded the Guardian newsroom, and I had lost all faith in the British judiciary. I think it was probably the country with the most authoritarian culture in terms of condemning the idea that journalists should ever report on anything that the government has decreed ought to be a secret. And so I certainly don't have very much expectation in the independence of the British judiciary. And it's, I think, encouraging to hear you say that, although you're not predicting the outcome, it sounds like they were at least trying to be more dignified in recognizing that there are some really serious problems with this extradition request in a way that you didn't expect. Let me ask you, you alluded to this appeal that Assange by legal right would have, where even if he loses in what is essentially, let's effectively just describe it as shorthand, kind of like the British Supreme Court. It's the highest and last appeal that he would have within the British judiciary. But he would then have an appeal to European courts, because Britain, even though they left the EU, is still subject to these conventions and treaties that guarantee a whole bunch of rights that Assange is claiming are violated. But as a practical matter, if the British High Court rejects Assange's argument and approves the U.S. extradition request, you have a government that has made very clear they despise Assange, a Tory government. The Home Secretary just is a new Home Secretary, but still, I presume, has a lot of hostility toward Assange and a lot of loyalty to the United States. Is there a possibility that they could act very, very quickly? In other words, wait for this hearing, and before Assange can even file his appeal, take him and put him on a plane and send him to the United States?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is so true about the culture in the UK, and just as a quick note, they didn't even want people to report on this case, and it's been the entire time, because they want it to be like a secret trial. But yeah, so under the European Convention on Human Rights, they can issue an Order 39, which could basically stay the extradition, so that basically they could not just put Assange on a plane and then send him to the United States. So the thing is that today you don't know, and especially with this case, you don't actually know if the British government are going to comply with that, because there's a probability, albeit a small one, that they could just say, screw it. We do have these obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights, but we're just going to send him anyway. That possibility still exists. We shouldn't underestimate for 1 second how brutal and how thuggish the security state can be, and you mentioned the time when they harassed your husband as well. This culture hasn't disappeared; it's still there. It's absolutely there. So legally, there is a way to stop the execution. The extradition for the time being. But when you look at the rights that are being violated, I just want to remind people these are not like European laws or something. They're enshrined in UK law under the Human Rights Act. So it's not like something optional. The United Kingdom has to respect Julian's rights, and almost every single one of them is being violated. It's truly incredible. If you look at Article 5 under the European Convention on Human Rights, the fact that you can't just arbitrarily put someone in jail, that is what's happening, because this is a political offense. Treason, espionage, these things are classical political offenses. So that's a violation of the extradition treaty. It's a violation of Article 5. If you look at Article 6, the CIA spied on Assange. They spied on his conversations with his lawyers. How can you spy on someone's privileged conversations with their lawyers and then say that they're getting a fair trial? Any case in the world would be thrown out, no matter who we're talking about or what we're talking about. And the fact that if he goes to the U.S., he'll be, given a jury of CIA employees in
Northern Virginia.
District Court.
In Northern Virginia, that's where
Right.
and his conviction. Just anyone tried under the Espionage Act, which is a very repressive law designed to guarantee convictions, automatically is almost condemned to guilt no matter what. And then you put someone like Julian Assange in a place where there's military contractors and CIA operatives and pretty much nothing else but that in Northern Virginia. And that's the reason they put them there, because they're beyond pro-national security judges. They are just agents of the U.S. security state. You, a couple times mentioned when you went to say extradition, you instead said execution. And in a way, it's kind of misspeaking, but I think in a bigger way, it's actually not. Because there's obviously a great deal of concern about Julian Assange's physical and mental condition. The last time I saw him was in 2017 or 2018, shortly before he was taken out of the embassy by the British police when Ecuador was coerced and bullied by Mike Pompeo to withdraw their asylum that allowed the British police to go in. And this is before he went into Belmarsh prison. And just to give people a sense, Belmarsh prison is not a joke. The BBC has called it the British Guantanamo. It's a high security prison. It's the place where terror suspects and people like that are put. He's done now 5 years of hard time. And when I saw him still in the embassy, he was looking, just very fragile, very gaunt, very unwell, as you would expect for somebody who hadn't been outside or seen the sunlight in, 8 years and was trapped in this tiny little apartment essentially for all of those years, year after year after year. Assange was not at, as I understand it, the 2 days of hearings. Have you been able to obtain in your time there any information about his physical and mental condition?
Yeah, that's correct. He wasn't there. I asked someone who did see him recently about 3 months ago in October, and these are the words that this person used. They said that he looked 70 with a 0, 70 years old. So, I think that's quite descriptive. The last time I saw him, which was on a video feed because he was tuning in from the prison to watch one of the hearings. This is about 2 years ago. I didn't even understand that was him at first. Like, just to give you an idea of how shocking, and again, I feel really bad for him. He just looked bad, and it took me a minute to understand that was him, because we were getting our things ready and we're getting ready to report, and he really doesn't look well, and this is the consequence of this persecution. It's not just a legal case. No, they're really killing him slowly, obviously, when you're sent to the U.S., if you're sent to the U.S. and you're put under special administrative measures, it's going to be way worse than Belmarsh. But that doesn't mean Belmarsh is okay. The fact that anyone in England is number one, given a custodial sentence, so that they're put in prison for a bail violation is it's rare, and not to mention in a maximum security prison, which is Belmarsh, which is Britain's Guantanamo, as you said. And then on top of that, given 52 weeks. I mean, this is so clear that they want him to be in prison. And they did this on purpose so that the United States can then unseal this indictment. And I should just remind people that the original indictment had about 6 counts under the Espionage Act, which is already ludicrous. And then after the deadline had already passed, they came out with a superseding indictment with 17 counts. So it was all a ploy. It was all a trick. To get Assange in there, hit him with this indictment, and make sure he never leaves. And there are people who were in Belmarsh prison. One of them is Abu Qatada. He was like a Jordanian suspected member of Al Qaeda, and even he was given better treatment out of the same prison and put under house arrest. There's no reason Julian Assange, if you're really going to argue, okay, he's a flight risk, you can put him under house arrest. He doesn't have to be in a maximum security prison where you're slowly killing him. There's just no argument for this. Not to mention the fact that he shouldn't be under house arrest at all. But, it just goes to show you how adamant and insistent they are on killing him. And I want to point out another thing. In court, they discussed the fact that the CIA want to kill him. And in the original ruling in 2021, when the extradition was blocked, it was only blocked on health grounds. The judge didn't seem to think that this was relevant information, that the CIA want to kill him. She was saying, well, this is a court case that's still playing out in Spain because the security company contracted by the CIA was in Spain. So she basically shrugged it aside. And then the U.S. lawyers, what they did this week is they said, well, this is not new information. The Yahoo News article, and I was laughing to myself because in a way the U.S. lawyer was right. Her name is Dobbin. We already know the CIA was trying to kill Assange in 2020, and we didn't need the Yahoo News article, but it is relevant evidence. So it's maybe not fresh evidence, but it's certainly relevant evidence. And the fact that they want to send Assange to a country that has plotted to kill him is egregious beyond words. I mean, any proper court in the world would have already thrown this case out from day one. I don't even know why this has been going on for 4 years. And they put on such a show with these mighty buildings and royal courts of justice. There's no justice in these courtrooms. I guarantee you that, Glenn. It's really a kangaroo court.
Oh, I know. And you know what? Honestly, what makes me so sick is, as you're describing so accurately, the fact that they're murdering Julian in real time, like in this kind of slow, deliberate way. I think it's worth noting, and you kind of alluded to it, but just to make it manifest, he hasn't been charged with any crimes. He's not in prison because he's been convicted of any crimes. They originally convicted him of a bail-jumping misdemeanor and gave him the maximum sentence possible under the law, which is 51 weeks, just under a year, that he has served the sentence for years ago. He's only in a high-security prison because they concluded he is a flight risk while waiting this extradition request to work its way through the courts. So they've effectively destroyed Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, just as Mike Pompeo in 2017 vowed he intended to do, without even having to charge him with a crime. And then, the parallels between things like what just happened to Navalny in a Russian prison, where he kind of died slowly and was put in these horrific prison conditions near the Arctic, what was done to Gonzalo Lira in Ukraine. You have this being done by our own government, by an allied government in Ukraine, and it's completely ignored. And the only time it's paid attention to is when there's some political benefit to derive and extract and exploit from it, when it happens to, when it's done by one of our official enemies. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.